Princess Alira sat in her chamber, surrounded by golden walls that shimmered in the dim light of evening. The palace of the Viuri Empire was grand, yet it felt like a prison to her. Every jewel, every shining surface, only reminded her of her duty, a duty that chained her tighter than iron. She looked out through the wide crystal window, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. The sky was calm, but her heart was storming. Alira had always known that her life was not her own. From birth, her path was chosen by others. Her father, Emperor Vyar, believed that peace was built not with freedom but with sacrifice. Wars had raged for decades between the Viuri and their rivals. Now, after so many lives had been lost, the emperor announced a solution. A marriage. A bond that would tie enemies together and end bloodshed. But for Alira, it was no bond of peace. It was a chain. Her maids whispered behind her back. She could hear their voices as they arranged her gowns and polished the silver ornaments laid out for her wedding. "The princess is being given away," one of them muttered. Another laughed softly, "to someone unworthy, perhaps even from a lesser world." Their words cut like glass, but Alira did not speak. She had learned long ago that a princess must smile even when her heart breaks. The court was buzzing with rumors. Some said her groom would be a prince from another star system. Others whispered he might be a soldier, chosen not for honor but as a show of dominance. None of them truly knew. Alira herself had not been told. The secrecy felt cruel, but it was the way of her father. That evening, the emperor summoned her to the throne room. The great hall stretched endlessly, its pillars carved with scenes of past victories. Torches of blue flame lit the path to the throne, where the emperor sat in heavy armor. His eyes were cold, sharp like steel, and his voice echoed with command. "You will marry tomorrow," he said without greeting. "The ceremony will be swift. You will show no fear, no hesitation. Our people must see strength." Alira lowered her eyes. "Yes, father. Do not shame this empire," he continued. "Your groom will be revealed in the hall. Accept him. The future of peace depends on it." She wanted to ask who he was. She wanted to demand why her life was being bound to a stranger. But she held her tongue. Questions were weakness in her father's eyes, and weakness was not allowed. When she left the hall, her heart was heavy. In the silence of her chamber, she allowed herself one moment of truth. She pressed her hand against her chest and whispered, "I do not want this." The words vanished into the still air, unheard by anyone but herself. That night, sleep did not come. She paced her chamber, her long gown trailing across the floor. Her thoughts circled like restless birds. What if her groom was cruel? What if he treated her as nothing but a prize of war? Would her life become endless days of silence and chains? At dawn, the palace stirred with preparation. The grand chamber was decorated with banners of silver and violet, the colors of the empire. Musicians tuned their strange stringed instruments, their notes trembling in the air. Nobles from distant worlds filled the seats, their eyes sharp with curiosity and hidden judgment. Everyone waited to see the princess who would bind two worlds with her smile. Alira was dressed in a gown of flowing white silk, heavy with jewels. The maids placed a crown of crystal upon her head. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The face was her own, but the eyes staring back were those of a prisoner. The guards arrived to escort her. As they walked through the palace halls, she held her chin high. She would not show fear. She would not allow the nobles to see her trembling heart. Step by step, she entered the great chamber. The crowd rose. A hush fell over the room as the emperor stood. His voice carried across the hall. "Today, we bind the future of our empire. Today, my daughter, Princess Alira, takes her place as the bridge between worlds." Alira's gaze swept across the room. Rows of alien faces stared back, some with interest, others with scorn. Her heart beat like a drum in her chest. She knew the moment was near. The emperor raised his hand. "Bring forth the groom." The heavy doors opened with a low sound. The hall fell silent, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Alira turned her eyes toward the entrance, expecting to see another noble, perhaps a warrior from a rival house. Instead, what she saw froze her in place. A man walked forward. His steps were steady, his shoulders broad. His clothes were simple compared to the jeweled robes of the nobles. His skin was warm in tone, his hair dark, his eyes sharp and alive. And most of all, he was not of her people. He was human. Whispers exploded across the chamber. A human? Impossible. The emperor would never allow this. What insult is this to the throne? But Alira heard none of them. She was staring at the man who would be her husband. He was not what she had feared. There was no cruelty in his gaze, no pride of conquest. Instead, his eyes held strength, and something more, something she had not seen in anyone else. Hope. For the first time in many months, Alira felt her lips curve into a small smile. It was faint, but real. Against all expectations, against all chains, her heart whispered that perhaps this path was not only duty. Perhaps it could be something more. The great hall of the Viore palace was alive with whispers, yet no one dared raise their voice above the echo of footsteps that carried through the chamber. Every eye was fixed on the man walking down the aisle. He was human, a being from a world considered small and weak compared to the great empires of the stars. His presence alone seemed to shake the foundations of tradition. Alira kept her gaze steady, even as her heart raced. She studied him carefully. His stride was not arrogant, nor was it timid. He walked as if he carried the weight of his own world on his shoulders, but he would not let it crush him. There was no jeweled crown, no shining armor. He wore a simple formal garment, dark cloth with a silver band around his waist. Yet somehow, in that simplicity, there was strength. The emperor's face was unreadable. He did not show pride or anger, only calm, as though he had expected this reaction from the court. Nobles leaned forward, their jeweled heads whispering into one another's ears. Some faces were twisted in disgust, others in shock. For the proud Viore, to give their princess to a human seemed unthinkable. The human stopped at the base of the stairs leading to the throne. He did not kneel. He bowed his head slightly, but he kept his back straight, his eyes fixed on the emperor. The silence in the hall grew heavy. "State your name," the emperor commanded. The man's voice was calm and steady. "My name is Tamash." A murmur ran through the crowd. Tamash. A short, plain name compared to the long, noble names of the Viore court. But Alira found herself repeating it silently. Tamash. The sound carried a strange weight, different from the titles and ranks she had always known. The emperor studied him. "You know why you stand here?" "Yes," Tamash replied. "I stand because I was chosen." "Do you accept the bond?" "I do." His words came without hesitation. The emperor turned his eyes toward Alira. "Daughter, step forward." Alira descended the steps slowly. The jewels on her gown caught the light, casting reflections across the chamber. Her face was calm, though her hands trembled beneath the folds of silk. She could feel the gaze of hundreds watching her every move, waiting for the smallest sign of weakness. She stopped beside Tamash. For a moment, they stood in silence, the princess of the Viore Empire and the human soldier. She lifted her chin, looking directly into his eyes. What she saw there was not pride or fear, but honesty. It unsettled her, yet at the same time, it warmed her. The emperor spoke once more. "This bond is not of love. It is of peace. You will stand together before this court as a symbol. If you fail, you will bring shame to both our worlds. Do you accept this burden?" "I accept," Tomash answered firmly. Alira drew in a deep breath. Her heart pounded, yet she forced her voice steady. I accept. The hall erupted with noise. Some clapped politely, others hissed in disapproval. The musicians struck their strings, playing the traditional melody of union. Servants carried forward a silver band, the sign of marriage in Vyuri tradition. Tomash and Alira each placed a hand upon it, and the band wrapped itself around their wrists, glowing faintly as it bound them together in the eyes of the court. Alira expected to feel nothing but the weight of chains. Yet when the band tightened around her wrist, she felt a strange calm. She glanced at Tomash, and to her surprise, he gave the smallest of nods, as if to say, "You are not alone." The ceremony ended, but the whispers did not. As Tomash and Alira walked together from the chamber, eyes followed them like daggers. Some were filled with curiosity, others with open hatred. Still, they walked side by side. When they reached the quiet of the palace corridor, Alira finally spoke. Her voice was low, almost cautious. You did not kneel. Tomash looked at her. I do not kneel to those who see me as lesser. But I bow out of respect. His words shocked her. No one had ever spoken so simply to her, not even the highest nobles. She had been treated as a symbol all her life, someone to be honored but never understood. Yet this human, with no crown or title, spoke as if she were just another person. For a moment, Alira did not know whether to feel insulted or relieved. You are bold, she said finally. Or foolish, he replied with a faint smile. The corner of her lips curved slightly. She had not expected humor, not here, not now. That night, the palace celebrated with a grand feast. Nobles filled the long tables, their plates heavy with rare foods from across the stars. Musicians played, dancers spun, and golden lights shimmered from the high ceiling. Yet under the beauty was tension. Every noble watched Tomash closely, waiting for him to make a mistake. Tomash sat beside Alira at the head of the table. He ate little, spoke less, but when he did, his words were plain and direct. One noble, a tall man named Lord Varun, sneered openly. Tell us, human, do your kind even understand the honor you have been given? To sit beside our princess is to sit above the stars themselves. The table grew quiet. Alira felt her chest tighten. She expected Tomash to remain silent or to stumble with words. Instead, he looked directly at Varun. I understand honor, Tomash said. Honor is not given. It is proven. A ripple of shock passed across the table. Varun's eyes narrowed, but he said no more. Alira lowered her gaze, hiding the smile that threatened to escape. For the first time, someone had spoken against the arrogance of the nobles, not with anger but with calm truth. Later, when the feast ended and the halls grew silent, Alira found herself standing on a balcony. The night sky stretched wide, filled with endless stars. Tomash joined her, standing a respectful distance away. Neither spoke for a while. The silence was not heavy, but strangely peaceful. At last, Alira turned to him. Why did you accept this marriage? Was it forced upon you? Tomash looked up at the stars. His answer was steady. It was not forced. I chose it. My people have suffered long under your empire's wars. If my life can be a bridge, then I will walk it. Even if it means walking into a storm. His words sank deep into her heart. She had expected him to hate her, to see her as the face of the empire that once fought his kind. Instead, he spoke of duty, but also of choice. It was something she had never been given. For the first time, Alira felt a spark of hope that this bond was not only chains. Perhaps, with this human, there could be more. She lifted her eyes to the stars again, and her smile returned, small but real. The princess who had felt trapped in chains now wondered if those chains might one day be broken. The days after the wedding passed slowly, filled with the weight of expectation. Every step Princess Alira took was watched by eyes that judged her, waiting for her to stumble. Every move Tomasz made was measured against centuries of Viore pride. To the nobles, he was not a groom but a test, and they prayed for his failure. Alira spent her mornings in the garden halls, wide spaces of crystal walls and flowing streams. The flowers of her world glowed faintly, their petals shimmering like captured starlight. She had always come here when she wished to be alone, but now she was never truly alone. Tomasz walked with her, though he often stayed a few steps behind, silent, as if unsure whether to speak. One morning, she turned to him. "You are quiet," she said. "I am learning," Tomasz replied. "Learning?" "Yes. When you are a stranger, the first thing you must do is listen. The walls of this palace speak, even when the people do not." His answer surprised her. Most nobles filled the air with endless words, eager to prove their wit and wisdom. Tomasz chose silence, and when he spoke, his words carried weight. She found herself wanting to ask him more, to know what he truly thought of this world that had caged them both in different ways. "Do you hate us?" she asked softly. He did not answer at once. His eyes moved across the garden, taking in the glowing flowers, the rushing streams, the statues carved of shining stone. At last, he said, "I hated the war. I hated the pain it brought to my people. But hate for an entire people blinds the heart. I will not carry it." Alira looked at him closely. His words carried no bitterness, only truth. For a moment, she felt something stir inside her. She had been surrounded by nobles who fed on pride and arrogance, who only thought of themselves. But this human spoke with honesty, even when the truth was heavy. That night, Alira returned to her chamber and sat beside the tall crystal window. She thought of his words, repeating them silently. She realized that for the first time in many years, she wanted to trust someone. The bond between them grew quietly, like a seed hidden in the soil. Small moments watered it. Tomasz would open doors for her without being asked, not out of duty, but out of respect. When she spoke, he listened without interrupting. When others mocked him in the halls, he did not reply with anger, but with calm. Slowly, Alira began to feel less like a prisoner and more like a person when he was near. But not everyone was pleased. One evening, during a banquet, a group of young nobles decided to test Tomasz. They challenged him to drink the strong Viore wine, which even trained warriors struggled to handle. Alira watched closely, her heart uneasy. Tomasz accepted the cup without fear. He drank it slowly, setting it down with steady hands. His face showed no weakness, no stumble. The nobles waited for him to falter, but he remained calm, his eyes clear. At last, he spoke. "Wine does not test strength. Words do. If you wish to challenge me, speak your truth, not your drink." The hall fell silent. Some laughed nervously, others scowled. Alira hid a smile behind her hand. She saw something in Tomasz that the others did not. His strength was not in muscle or tradition, but in spirit. Later, when the banquet ended, she found him standing alone in the balcony garden. The night wind carried the scent of the glowing blossoms. "You embarrass them," she said softly. "They embarrass themselves," he replied. "Strength should never be measured in foolishness." Alira looked at him with quiet admiration. She realized that every time he spoke, her heart felt lighter. But the bond between them did not grow without shadow. In the dark corners of the palace, lords and nobles whispered. Some spoke of dishonor, others of danger. A human in the heart of the empire was an insult to their pride, and some were willing to go further than whispers. One evening, Alira and Tomasz walked through the palace library. The shelves stretched endlessly, filled with scrolls and crystals of knowledge. Alira loved this place, where silence ruled and history whispered from every corner. As she reached for a scroll, she noticed a faint shadow behind one of the tall pillars. "Tomash," she whispered. He turned quickly, his soldier's instincts alive. A figure leapt from the darkness, a blade flashing in hand. Tomash reacted faster than Alira could think. He pulled her aside and blocked the strike with his arm. The blade cut his sleeve, leaving a shallow wound. The assassin tried again, but Tomash moved with trained precision. He struck the attacker's wrist, forcing the blade to fall, and then threw the figure to the ground. Guards rushed in, capturing the intruder. Alira's heart pounded. She looked at Tomash, his arm bleeding, yet his eyes calm. "You are hurt," she said. "It is nothing," he replied. "What matters is that you are safe." For the first time, Alira felt fear not for herself, but for him. She reached for his arm, her fingers brushing against the wound. "You risked yourself without thinking." He looked at her quietly. "That is what it means to protect." Her eyes softened. In that moment, something shifted inside her heart. The chains of duty still bound her, but within those chains, she found a light she had not expected. That night, Alira could not sleep. She sat by her window, watching the stars. Her thoughts returned again and again to Tomash. His courage, his honesty, his strength that did not come from titles or power, but from the core of who he was. She realized she no longer saw him as a stranger, or even as a burden forced upon her. She saw him as someone she wanted beside her. And so, the bond began. Not with grand speeches or endless promises, but with small truths, shared silences, and the unspoken trust that grew stronger each day. Alira, once a princess in chains, now felt the faint pull of freedom. And it came not from the empire, not from her father, but from the human who had stood beside her when no one else dared. The attempted attack in the library was only the beginning. The palace guards claimed they had captured a lone mercenary, but Tomash did not believe it. The strike had been too well timed, too precise. Someone of influence had given the order. Alira thought the same. As she walked through the endless halls of the palace, she felt the weight of eyes on her at every corner. Nobles bowed as she passed, their faces calm, but she could feel the hidden judgment behind their smiles. To them, her marriage was not unity. It was betrayal. Tomash never left her side. Wherever she went, he followed. He did not act like a servant, nor like a bodyguard, but like a shield. His quiet strength gave her comfort, yet it also painted a target on him. One evening, the emperor summoned them to the council chamber. The long table was surrounded by lords and generals, their robes heavy with jewels, their faces sharp with arrogance. Alira sat beside her father while Tomash stood behind her, silent but watchful. Lord Varun, the same noble who had mocked Tomash before, rose to his feet. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice smooth but edged with disdain, "it is clear that this union weakens us. Already, assassins move within our halls. This is not peace, it is poison." Several lords murmured in agreement. The emperor's eyes narrowed. "Peace always brings resistance. That is the price of change." Varun's gaze shifted to Tomash. "Or perhaps the price comes from allowing a human to walk among us. He is no symbol of unity. He is a danger." The words cut through the chamber. Tomash did not react, but Alira's hands clenched beneath the table. She wanted to speak, yet before she could, her father raised a hand. "This council will not question my decision," the emperor said firmly. "The union stands. Those who plot in shadows will be found and punished." The lords fell silent, though their eyes burned with hidden fire. Alira knew the silence was not defeat, it was only delay. That night, as Tomash and Alira returned to her chamber, she finally spoke. "They will not stop." "I know," Tomash replied. "Why do you stay calm?" she asked. Because anger feeds them. Calm confuses them. If they cannot break me, they cannot win. His words settled in her heart. She realized then that his strength was not only in his arms but in his mind. He carried himself with patience that the proud nobles could not understand. Days turned into weeks. The palace grew colder, not from the weather, but from the tension in its halls. Alira noticed small things: servants who avoided Tamash, whispers that stopped when they entered a room, strange looks exchanged by guards. It was clear that the enemies around them were no longer hiding their hatred. One night, during a festival in the city, Alira and Tamash walked through the grand streets. Lanterns floated in the air, glowing like stars, while merchants called out their wares. For a short time, Alira felt free, away from the heavy walls of the palace. Children laughed as they ran past, and the scent of roasted fruits filled the air. But the peace did not last. As they entered a quieter street, Tamash noticed movement in the shadows. His hand went to Alira's arm, guiding her back. A group of masked figures stepped forward, blocking the path. Their blades glinted under the lantern light. "Stay behind me," Tamash whispered. The attackers rushed forward. Tamash moved swiftly, his training as a soldier alive in every step. He caught one blade with his arm guard, striking the attacker with his elbow. Another came from the side, but Tamash twisted, pulling Alira close as the strike missed. His movements were not of a noble duelist, but of a soldier who had fought to survive. Alira's heart pounded as she watched him. He fought not with elegance but with determination, each move protecting her first. In moments, 2 attackers lay on the ground, groaning. The others fled into the shadows. Tamash breathed heavily but kept his eyes sharp, scanning for more danger. Alira reached for his hand. "You saved me again." He shook his head. "Not just you. Us. We are one now." Her chest tightened at his words. She realized he did not see himself as her guard or her servant. He saw himself as her equal, bound not only by duty but by choice. When they returned to the palace, the emperor's anger filled the halls. He demanded that the guards double their patrols, that the nobles answer for their loyalty. Yet Alira knew it would not end with more guards. The threat came not from the shadows of the city, but from within the palace itself. Later, as Alira sat with Tamash in the quiet of her chamber, she looked at him closely. His arm bore a new scar, his clothes torn from the fight. Yet his eyes still held that same calm strength. "You risk your life for me again and again," she whispered. "And I will continue to," he answered simply. "Even if it costs you everything." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Some things are worth more than everything." Alira felt her heart stir with emotions she could not name. She had been forced into this marriage, but now, she began to see it as something else. Not a chain, but a bond. Not duty, but choice. In the silence, she realized something important. The enemies that plotted against them were strong, but together, she and Tamash were stronger. For the first time, she did not feel afraid of what tomorrow would bring. She felt ready. Because she was no longer facing it alone. The palace was restless after the attack in the streets. Rumors spread through the marble halls like fire. Some whispered that the princess and her human husband had been targeted by common thieves. Others believed it was the work of hidden lords, trying to end the union. Whatever the truth, the fear remained. But Tamash did not bow to fear. He rose early each day, training in the palace courtyard. Soldiers passing by would pause to watch him. His movements were not the graceful style of the Vyuri warriors, but sharp, efficient, and practical. He fought as one who had learned on real battlefields, not from polished tutors. Alira often watched him from the balcony above. At first, she watched only with curiosity, but soon she found herself admiring his patience and discipline. Every swing of his wooden staff, every step of his training, spoke of endurance. He was not the strongest or the fastest, yet he was steady, and she knew steady strength often outlasted flashy power. One morning, she descended into the courtyard, surprising him. "You train like a soldier, not a noble," she said. "That is what I am," Tomasz replied. "A soldier learns to survive, not to impress." She tilted her head. "And what do you survive for now?" He paused, then met her eyes. "For you. For us." Her heart warmed at his words. She had always been seen as a symbol, never as a person. Yet Tomasz spoke to her as though she was someone worth fighting for, not just a princess on a throne. Their bond deepened, and so did their trials. Not long after, news arrived that raiders had crossed the border into Vyuri space. Villages near the frontier were under attack, and the generals gathered in the war council. Alira was summoned with her father, while Tomasz followed quietly. The generals spoke with pride, their voices heavy with arrogance. "We must crush them with full force," one declared. "Show them the might of the empire." Another shook his head. "Our armies are spread thin. A hasty strike could weaken us further." The emperor listened, his face calm, but it was clear no plan pleased him. Finally, one of the lords sneered toward Tomasz. "Why not ask the human? Perhaps he can tell us how to fight like farmers from his world." The chamber filled with laughter, cruel and sharp. But Tomasz did not lower his head. He stepped forward. "You face raiders, not an army. If you chase them with your full strength, they will scatter. You will waste soldiers for nothing. Instead, cut off their supply lines. Leave them hungry, leave them desperate. Then, strike where they cannot run." The laughter faded. Silence filled the chamber as the generals studied him. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience. Alira saw pride rise in her father's eyes, though he did not show it openly. "The human speaks with sense," the emperor said. "We will follow this plan." And so, Tomasz was sent to the frontier not as a soldier under command, but as a leader. Alira feared for him. When he left the palace, dressed in the armor of the Vyuri, she placed her hand on his arm. "Promise me you will return." "I promise," he said, though both knew promises on the battlefield were fragile. The days that followed were heavy for Alira. She spent hours in the garden, looking toward the stars, waiting for news. The court whispered that the emperor was foolish to trust a human with command. Some even celebrated quietly, believing Tomasz would fail. But Alira refused to believe it. Deep in her heart, she trusted him. Weeks passed before the message came. The raiders had been defeated with minimal loss. Tomasz's strategy had worked exactly as he described. His name spread across the frontier, not as a stranger, but as the man who brought victory. When he returned to the palace, the soldiers who had fought beside him marched proudly at his side. They spoke of his leadership, how he fought not from behind but at the front, sharing every danger with his men. Alira ran to meet him in the courtyard. She did not care who watched. "You returned," she said, her voice trembling. "As I promised," he replied with a tired smile. The nobles could no longer mock him so easily. Even those who despised him were forced to admit his success. Still, their hatred did not vanish. In private corners of the palace, they plotted harder than ever, fearing what Tomasz might become. That evening, a celebration was held in the great hall. Musicians played, and banners of silver and violet filled the air. Soldiers lifted their cups in honor of Tomasz. Even the emperor raised his hand, saying, "This human has shown us strength beyond blood. Let none doubt the power of unity." Alira's chest swelled with pride. She looked at Tomasz beside her, knowing he had not only proven himself to the empire but also to her heart. When the celebration ended, they walked together through the quiet corridors. Alira turned to him, her voice soft. You have changed how they see you. Not all of them, he said. Does it matter? He thought for a moment. No. What matters is how you see me. She stopped walking, her eyes fixed on his. In that moment, she understood what she had felt growing inside her. He was no longer just her husband by duty. He was her partner, her shield, her equal. And she smiled, not the practiced smile of a princess, but the true smile of a woman who had found hope. Still, in the shadows of the palace, hidden eyes watched. Lords whispered of betrayal, of danger. They would not let a human rise too high. Their plots grew darker, sharper, waiting for the moment to strike. But for now, Alira and Tamash walked side by side, stronger than ever. The chains that once bound her now felt lighter, broken piece by the strength of the human who had entered her life. White heavy check mark around 1,000 words. The palace buzzed with tension. Though the raiders had been defeated, the whispers of discontent had grown louder. Many nobles could not forgive a human for gaining power and respect. To them, Tamash was not a hero but a threat, a disruption to the order they had followed for centuries. Alira noticed the change immediately. The nobles no longer spoke openly against Tamash during gatherings, but their eyes followed him with suspicion. Their whispers carried through the halls, sharper than any blade. Some plotted quietly in chambers far from the throne, seeking a way to remove him without directly challenging the emperor. Alira's heart ached. She had learned to hide her emotions as a princess, but now she no longer wished to hide. She had seen the courage of Tamash, his honesty, his unwavering loyalty. He had earned the respect of soldiers, of people, and even of some hesitant nobles. Yet danger still lingered in the shadows. One morning, the emperor called a council. The great chamber was filled with lords, generals, and advisors. The air was heavy, thick with tension. Alira stood beside Tamash, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Together, they faced the court, united. The union between our worlds must continue, the emperor announced. Those who oppose it will be held accountable. A murmur of dissent rose from the nobles. One of the older lords, a man named Varin, stepped forward. Your Majesty, he said, his voice smooth but sharp, the human, Tamash, has gained undue influence. He is not of our people. How can we trust him to act in the empire's best interest? Tamash did not flinch. He spoke clearly, without arrogance. I act for what is right, not for my origin. A leader is judged by action, not by bloodline. The council fell silent. Alira saw the surprise in the noble's eyes. Many had expected him to stumble, to falter under pressure. But he did not. His calm courage shone through, even in the midst of doubt. Alira felt a surge of pride. She had always been told that strength lay in titles, wealth, and lineage. Yet here stood a human who had proved that courage and wisdom could transcend tradition. She knew then that she would stand with him, no matter the cost. The council continued with heated debates, but Alira and Tamash listened, learning who among the nobles could be allies and who would not bend. By the end, the emperor made a decision. The empire moves forward. Tamash will continue to serve as my advisor on matters of defense and strategy. The union is not only a symbol but a necessity. Though some nobles grumbled, the decree was final. Alira and Tamash had faced the court together, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of change in their rigid ways. Yet the enemies in the shadows did not rest. That night, Alira found a message slipped under her chamber door. It was written in delicate Viuri script, but the meaning was clear: trust no one. The human's rise will bring ruin. She called Tamash immediately. His eyes darkened as he read the note. They are plotting, he said calmly. We must be ready. Alira's hand tightened around his. We are stronger together, aren't we? He nodded. Yes. That is what they cannot understand. Unity is stronger than fear. The days that followed were tense. Alira and Tomash moved carefully, speaking only when needed, watching the nobles' movements, learning who could be trusted. Slowly, they built a small network of ally soldiers loyal to Tomash, advisors who respected the princess, and even a few nobles who had begun to see the benefit of change. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, Alira spoke quietly. "I never thought a human could change so much here." Tomash looked at her, his eyes soft. "Not change the empire, princess. Change begins with courage, with choice. And that is what we both have shown." She smiled. I think I finally understand. The empire does not need chains. It needs hearts willing to act." He took her hand. "Then we will act together." Weeks later, a small crisis arose near the border. A rebellion had begun among the frontier villages. Tomash was called to lead the response, but this time, he did not go alone. Alira insisted on accompanying him. Her presence, though symbolic, showed the people that the princess and the human were united, their bond more than ceremonial. The journey was long and dangerous. The frontier lands were rugged, filled with forests and mountains. Alira saw the struggles of the people firsthand: villages burned, families displaced, soldiers exhausted from constant defense. Tomash did not falter. He organized relief, strengthened defenses, and spoke to villagers with kindness and respect. Alira observed him closely, learning how courage and wisdom could guide not only armies but hearts. At night, when they made camp, Alira asked him, "How do you remain so calm in the face of danger?" Tomash looked at the glowing campfire. "Fear is natural. But it is not what we act on. Strength comes from knowing what must be done and moving forward, even when the heart trembles." Alira considered his words. She had always acted from duty, from fear of shame or failure. But now she realized there was a different path. One could act from courage, from choice, from the desire to do what was right. The rebellion was quelled not by force alone, but by strategy and understanding. Tomash worked with village leaders, showing them that their loyalty could be earned without bloodshed. The soldiers followed his lead, and the people began to see the empire not as a distant authority, but as something that cared. When they returned to the palace, news of their success spread quickly. Even the skeptical nobles could not deny the results. Tomash's leadership, combined with Alira's presence, had turned a potential disaster into a victory. Alira stood beside him in the throne room, facing the court. She felt no fear now, only a quiet confidence. Together, they had proven that change was possible, that tradition could bend without breaking, and that courage could bridge worlds. The enemies had not vanished, but their power was weakened. Alira and Tomash had begun a quiet revolution not with swords alone, but with trust, strength, and unity. The palace had changed since the day Tomash had entered it. The halls were no longer filled with whispers of doubt alone. Courage, respect, and hope had quietly begun to spread. People no longer saw the human as an outsider but as a symbol of wisdom and strength. Even some of the older nobles, though reluctant, had begun to acknowledge the truth: Tomash had proven himself, and no title could replace action and honor. Alira moved through the halls with a lighter step. She had grown stronger too, not only as a princess but as someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the meaning of choice. She walked beside Tomash with pride, their hands brushing occasionally, a silent reminder of the bond that had grown between them. The emperor called a grand council. This time, the purpose was not to argue but to celebrate the unity that had formed. Soldiers, advisors, and nobles gathered, filling the vast chamber with anticipation. Alira and Tomash entered together, their presence commanding attention without a word. "Today," the emperor began, his voice steady, "we recognize not only a union of worlds but the courage that binds us all. The human who stands beside our princess has shown wisdom and bravery beyond measure. Let this day mark a new era for the empire. A quiet murmur of approval spread through the hall. Tomasz remained calm, his eyes focused on Alira, as if drawing strength from her presence. She returned his gaze with a smile, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of their journey together. The emperor continued, Alira and Tomasz have faced danger, distrust, and opposition. They have acted not for titles or wealth, but for the greater good. May this example guide us all. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the old ways could no longer hold. Tradition was strong, but courage had proven stronger. The young princess and the human had begun to rewrite what the empire could be. After the council, Alira and Tomasz walked through the palace gardens, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The glowing flowers reflected in the crystal streams, casting gentle light across their faces. For a moment, they walked in silence, enjoying the peace that was so rare in their lives. You have changed this world, Alira said softly. Tomasz shook his head. Not me alone. We did this together. Alira's hand found his. I never believed a human could mean so much to this empire, she said. I never believed I could feel so free. He smiled gently. You were never truly free while you carried only duty. Now, you choose, and you act. That is freedom. Alira's heart swelled. She had once believed her life was nothing more than a chain of expectations, a path carved by others. Now she understood that courage, honesty, and trust could break even the heaviest chains. And Tomasz had shown her that. The days that followed were filled with efforts to strengthen the empire and help its people. Tomasz worked tirelessly, not to gain glory, but to bring fairness and protection. Alira stood beside him, learning, guiding, and sometimes questioning. Their bond deepened through each choice they made together, through every challenge they faced. One morning, a delegation arrived from a neighboring empire. Their leaders came with gifts and words of respect, having heard of Tomasz's deeds and the strength of the princess who stood beside him. Alira observed the exchange quietly, noting the shift in attitude. The world beyond their palace was beginning to see what she and Tomasz already knew: unity, courage, and honesty were more powerful than fear or prejudice. That evening, as they returned to the palace, Alira turned to Tomasz. Do you ever regret coming here? She asked. He shook his head. Never. I have found a purpose, and I have found someone I can trust completely. That is worth every challenge. Alira smiled, her heart light. And I have found someone who sees me as I am, not as a symbol or a princess. Someone who stands beside me, not above me. Their fingers intertwined, a simple gesture that carried the weight of all they had endured. The palace was still not free from all threats. Some nobles still whispered in secret, plotting small schemes to regain influence. But Alira and Tomasz had learned to act carefully, to see beyond shadows, and to trust their own strength. Each obstacle that came their way only made their bond stronger, their understanding deeper. One night, as the stars glittered above the palace, Alira and Tomasz walked along the balcony. The city below was quiet, peaceful. Alira leaned slightly against him, her voice soft. Do you think the empire will ever fully accept us? Tomasz's hand rested on her shoulder. Perhaps not entirely. But we have begun something that cannot be undone. Change starts with courage, and that courage spreads. Alira nodded. Then we continue, together. Yes, he said firmly. Together. Time passed, and the empire slowly transformed. Soldiers learned to respect not only rank but honor. Nobles discovered that leadership required wisdom and fairness, not only tradition. And throughout it all, Alira and Tomasz remained side by side, their unity a quiet but powerful reminder that strength could come from unexpected places. One morning, the emperor called them to the palace balcony. The sun rose over the city, casting gold across the spires and streets. He gestured to the people gathered below. Look closely, he said. These two, Alira and Tamash, represent the courage, the wisdom, and the unity we must all embrace. They are no longer a princess and a human alone. They are a symbol of hope. Alira squeezed Tamash's hand, feeling the warmth and strength that had carried them through countless challenges. The people below cheered, not for titles or rank, but for the bond they had witnessed, a bond forged in courage and trust. As the sun rose higher, Alira felt a quiet joy she had never known. She had once feared her life was a path of chains, of duty without choice. Now, she knew freedom could exist even within responsibility. She had learned that courage, honesty, and trust could overcome fear, and love could grow where respect and understanding flourished. Tamash turned to her, his eyes full of quiet strength. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," he said. Alira smiled, no longer the hesitant princess she had been, but a woman who had found strength, purpose, and partnership. "Together," she repeated. The palace, the empire, and the world beyond would always hold challenges. But Alira and Tamash had proven something greater than fear or tradition. When courage, wisdom, and unity guide the heart, even the most impossible odds can be overcome.